Hello, everybody. I'm Byron. I'm here reviewing Family Ties episode 6, or as I've learned, 6. It's been 6. It's called Give Your Uncle Arthur a Kiss. And Uncle Arthur is a creepy uncle. Although he used to be a nice guy, and Steve and Elise think he's a nice guy. And at the beginning, everyone in the family thinks he's a nice guy. But he's alone with Mallory, and he turns into creepy Uncle Arthur. And he hugs her, and he grabs her butt. And then it's sort of similar to the last episode in that the beginning is the beginning and the first act and the second act sort of have the same plot, but it escalates at the end of the first act to be just a more serious version of. So the second act is just a more serious version of the first act. So Mallory goes to after he touches her butt, she goes to Alex. I think that makes sense. He's the one she would go to. I think that makes a lot of sense. And this is the scene with probably the funniest joke in the episode is, are you sure you want to talk to me about this? It could get too personal. I'll go get outside and get a stranger. And so there's the joke. You gotta watch the episode. They're much better than I am at making jokes. And so then it ends quickly. Alex kind of convinces her, maybe you're mistaken. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he didn't make it past at you. Maybe, I don't know. But then they get together, and Mallory is alone with him again. After she's like, well, I guess he didn't make it past at me. But then she's alone with him again, and he kisses her on the mouth. And that's become obvious that he is making it past at her. And that's, again, where the first act is, and the second act becomes an escalated version of the first act. And so during the whole thing, at the beginning of the second act, she tells Alex. And so Alex is like, yep, that was a pass, all right. And she only tells Alex, and she doesn't want to tell her parents, which is something I could sort of understand. Yeah. Hold on, let me collect my thoughts. I could sort of understand that, how she wouldn't want to tell her parents. And part of the plot is Arthur's leaving. He's going to leave town in just a couple days. So, as long as she is not alone in a room with him ever, she doesn't have to tell anyone. It's what it looks like to me. And so anyway, for about the first bit of the second act, Stephen and Elise don't know, and Stephen is making these terrible, terrible speeches about how great PBS is. Stephen manages the PBS station. That's his job. He makes these awful jokes about how great PBS is, and these awful speeches about how great PBS is and how great Uncle Arthur is as he's leaving. And then Mallory tries to talk to Alex again, and oh no, wait, I got the order wrong. Yeah, she talks to Alex after this speech thing. So in that scene, only Mallory knows that Arthur is not a great person. The episode is called "Give Your Uncle Arthur a Kiss." Don't know if I mentioned that. I think I did. And then after the speech scene, although there's a callback later, after the speech scene, Mallory talks to Alex again, and then Alex agrees, yeah, there's definitely pass. And then Elise comes in, and Alex is like, yeah, tell her I'm leaving. Bye. And so she finally tells Elise. And this is the part I keep hearing. I mean, I believe it. I believe it's true that women feel this way. I really don't understand it. And she says to Elise, don't get mad at me for saying this. People say that's how women act in this situation. And I guess it is, but I can't wrap my head around why. But what I do understand is she says another line. Elise says, look, we got to confront him. And she's like, no, I don't really want to confront him. And can't we pretend this didn't happen? That's what she says, can't we pretend this didn't happen? And that I understand. that's a thing that I can understand how a woman would feel that way. And but at least convinces her no, which is kind of a shaky argument. Uh, she says she could do it to someone else. I don't really see that. Um, Again, there's what he did. Yeah, I guess it's wrong to do what he did to any woman, but it's really wrong to do it to a 15-year-old. Um, yeah, there's sort of. I mean, he didn't. That's the thing. She didn't. It takes very. This episode did that with the pilot was like that, and with other things. It takes things that are wrong, but it takes a very very mild version of them. Uh, like this, a couple of passes at a 15-year-old. It's all that really happened. It could have gotten much much darker, but it didn't. It just they are sort of shallow dives, but then they talk about them as though they're very serious, which they are. Obviously a pass is a very serious thing. Uh, More than going, not more, but just because there are much worse things that could have happened doesn't make these things not bad. But these sort of take the smallest slice out of these serious issues, but it really does tackle them, and I think probably it's more relatable because this has probably happened to a lot of girls, but the more serious you get, the less and less girls it's happened to. Okay. Anyway, and I wanted to bring up the movie Eighth Grade, where a similar thing happens in eighth grade. The girl's in eighth grade, and she meets a senior in high school, and she's in a car alone with him, and he tries to make a pass at her, and she says no, and screams and pushes him off, and he goes fine, fine, and he leaves, and what the girl in eighth grade says, and this is really heartbreaking. When she says this, she says, "Please don't tell anyone about this to him." And that is heartbreaking. It's like an even much more serious version. Again, that scene was much more serious than anything that happened in this movie, even though in that scene could have been a lot worse. But it's similar to the "Don't get mad at me for saying this" line in this episode. But it's again much more serious. And eighth grade is much less funny than this show. Anyway, let me step back and collect my thoughts. So, and while I mentioned it, this episode is actually probably the least funny so far. Actually, the 50s party, the boy girl 50s party, might not have been that funny. Um, yeah, I don't want to rank them in terms of how funny they are, but this one actually wasn't that funny as much as the one earlier where the father's dying. That was wound up being much funnier than this episode. No, don't get me wrong, very funny episode. And like I think most of the episodes, the humor is largely concentrated in the first act, where again it's a less serious version, and then it escalates in the second act. So then the humor sort of takes a cut because of that. Anyway, but there is what could have been a very funny scene, and it was a funny scene, but it could have been a very funny scene. Is Elise begins to confront Arthur, says, "Arthur, I need to talk to you," and they got like 10 seconds before they're about to go live on the telethon. And Elise starts talking to him, and it's a scene you've probably seen before in other shows. As they go live, she starts confronting them, and then they really start to get in a bigger and bigger and bigger fight as it's trying to be controlled. It's something you gotta watch to really understand, but once you see it, you'll be like, yes, I've seen that sort of scene before. But hilarity ensues with the whole being live and being in a fight. But it could have been funnier. And so after that, there are three conversations that happen. One is between Elise, Steven, and Arthur. Arthur blames his divorce for what happened. Maybe that's the case, maybe not. To try and flesh out the character a bit, the character's pretty good. He's like the other characters that have just had one show. they didn't even have to mention the divorce. They could have just said, he said, I don't know why I did it, and stuff like that. I don't know. And that to me was believable. He didn't even have to say it's probably because he was divorced. He didn't have to bring that in, but they did, and they explained it that way. And then after that, there was a Mallory Arthur confrontation. And this is when I began to get worried, because that was a weird way to say it, but I began to get worried because the episode was winding down at that point, and Mallory and Arthur confront and they talk about what happened. And I was beginning to get worried that this would be the last scene. And the last scene so far has always been between members of the family. And that's what makes it a great show. That's part of what makes it a great show. But then Mallory and Steven get together and they have a little conversation. And that makes it good. So this is a really funny episode. And of course, Mallory and Steven, they don't make up, but they come to an understanding about each other. Although I think in the last episode, the final conversation was between Steven and his father. It wasn't between two of the main characters, but it was at least between family members. So yeah, the last episode, maybe it should have ended between Steven and Alex. Would have been a better ending to the last episode. Anyway, this episode, Mallory and Steven, they have a nice conversation. They understand each other better at the end. And sort of the air of the phrase. So, for it to be a good episode, for it to be a good story, let's go back to the Greek. The hero has to make a mistake. That's classic Aristotelian, tragedy. And I think perhaps the hero did make a mistake, and that's what makes this last scene worth it, is the mistake that Mallory realizes she made is perhaps when she said, don't get mad at me for saying this. She should never have thought her parents would get mad. She should never have even been afraid of her parents getting mad. Yes. So that was sort of the tragic hero situation, was the phrase, don't get mad at me for saying this. And maybe what they were going for more was when she said, can't we pretend this didn't happen? That might be what the writers were going for as her mistake, was because, and the logic was he could do this to other girls. I didn't really see that. Of course, Elise didn't know as much of the story as I did. And to me, it didn't seem like he was ever going to do that with anyone else. That it was just a one-off thing with Mallory. That's what it seemed like to me watching him. But Elise wouldn't have known that. Maybe even Mallory wouldn't have known that, the way I seem to have perceived it. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he would have done it with other girls. So I think what the writers were going for was, can't we pretend this didn't happen as the mistake? But what I see as the mistake as, don't get mad at me for saying this. That line. And Mallory and Steven make up. And you know what? Since it was Mallory and Steven making up, I think that does point to it was, don't get mad at me for saying this, being the mistake. If it was Mallory and Elise, it might be pointing to the, can we pretend this didn't happen? But she was afraid she'd ruin the friendship between Arthur and Steven, and that might have been part of the reason she said, don't get mad at me for saying this. Anyway, great episode. Could have been funnier. Could have been a little bit better. There were just, but this is harder. This is the Summer of '82 episode where Alex has sex with the girl and he breaks up with her and she dumps him. It's as well written as it can be. This one might be in total as well written as that one, but it could have been better. So, and I think if this episode had been a little better, the jokes had been a little better, the fight had been been written a little better. It had been more physical at first, and then the specific words they chose to let, because of course you didn't hear the conversation they had as they fought, because you were doing it from the perspective of the telethon. But you could have randomly heard a few words that could have been very embarrassing, and it could have been much funnier, that one specifically, and also it could have been written a little better. His lines Arthur's lines could have been written a little more believably. And if this had been a better episode, I think Mallory would have been the breakout star, not Alex. Well, maybe. I don't really know. But like I said, this was a hard one to do. It was a great episode. They get a lot of credit for even making the episode. Even if it had been much worse, they would still deserve a lot of credit for making the episode. And I think it could have been better. And also, maybe at the 80s, if you'd have made it any differently, it wouldn't have worked. But of course, today you can make this episode much better. I would love to see that. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Bye.